الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
My name is Syed Ali. I'm one of the board of directors here at the East Plano Islamic Center, and I welcome all of you on behalf of EPIC. I want to thank our guest speakers, Brother Khalil Meek, who is the co-founder and also the executive director of the Muslim Legal Fund of America, and also Sister Alia Salem, who is the executive director of the Dallas chapter of the Council of Islamic Relations. This was a very short notice. Alhamdulillah, we're grateful that we are able to host this program today because this impacts all of us as Muslims. What's happening, you all are aware of what's happening abroad, especially in Syria and in Iraq, with groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And so all the things that are happening abroad have a direct impact on Muslims, especially Muslims who are living as minorities in different countries. So even though our religion is Rasulullah taught us to be moderate in the religion and not to be extreme, because extremism destroyed the people who came before us. That was one of the guidance of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But unfortunately, the extremist groups and ideologies such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda commit atrocious acts of violence and viciousness in the name of Islam, and that are complete antithesis or completely opposite with what the actual teachings of Islam are. They also have an extremely narrow definition and interpretation of what constitutes an Islamic state and do not represent Islam or Muslims. In fact, these groups should be called anti-Islamic or un-Islamic state. And they also have a warped religious ideology that must be unequivocally condemned and rejected by all Muslims. As I mentioned earlier, as American Muslims, we are all impacted by the events abroad, and also the perception and the attitudes of Americans in general about Islam and Muslims are not favorable. Hence, there is a dire need for education and dialogue on the true teachings and the values of Islam. Alhamdulillah, at the East Plano Islamic Center, we are collaborating with MLF and CAIR to bring you this program and also to present the true teachings of Islam about what constitutes a legitimate struggle for freedom and justice, and what constitutes extremism and terrorism. So the format or the agenda of the program tonight is going to be, Imam Nadeem is going to talk about the topic Islam, a religion of moderation, for about 10 to 15 minutes. And inshallah, after that, the Khalil Meek is going to talk about the impact of terrorism and counterterrorism on Muslim minorities. And then lastly, Sister Alia Salem will also talk about know your rights if federal law enforcement contacts you. We'll try to have a question and answer session after these topics are done. And if we have to extend the time of the Isha prayer, we want to extend it by half an hour, inshallah, so that we can get all the Q&A answered. I'm going to introduce the speakers later on in the program. And who needs an introduction of Imam Nadeem? All right, so I'll let Imam Nadeem go first, inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا أما بعد سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So once again, as Brother Sayyid Ali said, that I do not need any introduction, and I'm sure that all of you have heard me, you hear me speaking every single day. You heard me in the khutbah, the sisters have heard me the second time today in the Sira lecture. So I don't think you want to hear me so much as you want to hear Brother Khalil and Sister Alia, because I've attended some of their programs and they have some great advices, and they can share a lot of insight into these particular matters. But just talking about Islam and a religion of moderation, subhanAllah, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, that we have created you on a moderate path. And strictly when you look at moderation and extremism in Islam, in all aspects of life, the Prophet ﷺ, he has taught us that there could be two extremes in any case. In any particular matter, there are two extremes, but the Prophet ﷺ has always taught us to stay away from those both extremes and to always take the path which is the middle path. When you look at moderation in terms of ibadah, there is one extreme where a person, he only worships and never looks after his family. That is one extreme. You have the other extreme that a person does not pray at all. The Prophet ﷺ, he tells us that you have to pray, but at the same time he says that do not do it so much where you are, besides the fara'id, you are doing so much where now you are violating the rights of your family members. So in subhanAllah, our deen is all about moderation, and as long as we stay on this ummatan wasata, or this middle path, this middle path will eventually lead us to Jannah. Now, in this day and age, we talk about extremism, and we say that we talk about different groups and different ideologies and entities that do exist on the face of this earth that are having a direct impact on the lives of everyone else on the face of this earth. And for example, we were talking about different groups. And when we talk about extremism, we have to really look at the life of Rasulullah. And during the time of the Prophet, he had his opposition. There was the Quraysh. The battles would take place against the Quraysh. There were times where he was in conflict, or there were expeditions against the Jews of Medina, the Yahud of Medina. And so it is not that the Prophet ﷺ, he did not have his own opposition. He had his own people he had to oppose. But subhanAllah, when you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, whenever even you talk about war, there was war, but the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ will always supersede in all those situations. After the battles would take place, if there were people that could be freed, then the Prophet he would free them. If they could be given as slaves, he would give them away as slaves. But never do we learn from the life of the Prophet ﷺ that he would go to the point where he would begin to take the lives of other people also. And so when we look at all these other groups, we really have to understand, and we have to sit down with our children and tell them also, because there are some children within our society that they look at this, they watch this on the news every single day, and for the youngsters, they understand, okay, that we understand what the situation is. But there are some children who are deeply impacted by this, and they're questioning every single day. And that why, they are Muslims and we are Muslims, what are they doing that you are saying that they are not actually Muslims? So we need to really sit down and talk to our children. We should not just depend on programs of these type where we would, where we feel like that this is a program that will educate my child. No, we need to have this conversation with our own children. Talk to our children, because they watch TV every single day, and especially when we're talking about groups like ISIS, it is all over the news. And they see this every single day. It's all over Facebook, it's all over Twitter. So when they are so much exposed to this, we really need to sit down and talk to them about this. And once again, we know that the actions, as right now, currently, Muslim scholars have openly said that we have absolutely no relationship. There is no connection between this particular group who claims to be Muslims, and they're nowhere connected with the mainstream Islamic Ummah right now. And what we have seen right now also is that they're called extremists by the American media. They're called extremists, but honestly, the way I look at it is that they have taken, even though there is anger, there is aggression, they have taken that to that level where now they are doing things which is not in accordance to the Sunnah of Rasulullah, but now they are taking the lives of other people, thinking that this is the only way we are establishing the Islamic State. And so this is going, and so once again, since this is crossing the limits of Sharia, this is now where you become an extremist. So we all are familiar with this, and without any further ado, I think that this topic of extremism does not need a lot of elaboration. We understand how they are crossing the limits of Sharia, and how they are violating other people's rights. During the time of Rasulullah, even though there were Jews and Christians, a lot of non-Muslims have asked that Muslims cannot live in harmony with other religions, and that's wrong. When the Prophet migrated to Medina, you had people from different groups and different religions, and the Prophet ﷺ was able to live with them in peace and in harmony. It was only when the Jews, they betrayed the trust and they went against the treaty and the agreement that was initially set up in the early days of Medina. That is why the Prophet went against the people in Medina. So, having said that, inshallah, I'll go ahead and give it to Brother Khalil, and he will give, he can hopefully elaborate more upon this. Sister Aliyah, as Brother Sayyid, I'm not sure if you mentioned, Sister Ali, Brother Khalil Meek is from MLF, which is the Muslim Legal Fund of America. He will tell you exactly what do they do. They're fulfilling, I think they're doing a great job in really standing up for social justice, which is something that we see from the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam during the incident of Hilf al-Fudul. Hilf al-Fudul was all about social justice, and then you have Sister Aliyah Salem, who represents CAIR DFW, and what they are doing is that they are they're presenting themselves to the media, and they're openly saying to the people in the media that we have absolutely nothing, Muslims here in America have absolutely nothing to do with ISIS overseas. So inshallah, without any further ado, I'll give it to Brother Khalil Meek.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alayhi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum. Kayfa halak? Let's start by saying Alhamdulillah. Say Alhamdulillah for Allah giving us the beautiful religion of Islam, for our families, and all the blessings in our lives. Say Alhamdulillah. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth, and He set up the balance of justice. Allah Himself is Al-Adl, the just. Allah ordered Muslims to be just. He said, "O you who believe, stand out firmly for Allah and be just." Be just, that is next to taqwa, next to piety. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said every day in which the sun rises, there's a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those who establish justice among the people. So today, brothers and sisters, I'm here representing an organization whose noble mission is to try to fulfill the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tonight's topic, we're talking about terrorism and how it affects the Muslim community. First off, we want to start, and it says that terrorism is an act of injustice. Terrorism is killing, maiming, injuring innocent people. So if we want to understand Islam's perspective, like the Sheikh said, it is very simple to say that Islam's approach to justice is comprehensive. It's all-embracing. For Muslims, justice is the greatest of all duties, entrusted to all the prophets, and it is the strongest justification for man's stewardship on earth. Muslims are not only commanded to deal with injustice by caring for victims, we're commanded to establish justice. And when it comes to terrorism, there is no justice in terrorizing, harming, injuring, or anything to do with innocent people. So the conduct of warfare from A to Z, everything about Islam is against terrorism, against the idea of ISIS, against the acts that we've seen on our television set. So there's no place, no time, and no conditions for this to exist in Islam. But having said that, it's happening, so you see it. So what are the effects that terrorism is having on our community? And this is something that we can't just end with saying it's not part of Islam, so we go on with our daily lives, because things are being affected around us. And we live in one of the most regulated societies on the planet, and those regulations continue to be increased on a daily basis. And we have what's called counterterrorism policies that if you're not aware of them, you should be, because they can affect you, your children, in some of the most mundane ways that you've never thought about. And I want to share with you today some of the things that we see happening around us, not only in court, but as effect of terrorism since 9/11 until today, and every act that has exaggerated that problem is something that we have to deal with as a community. Muslims, non-Muslims, Americans, all societies have to deal, or they set ideals. We set what we call civil rights, civil liberties, in a civil society. Islam has moderation, we have human rights, civil rights, societal rights, everybody has this. But we don't always live up to our ideals. So as Muslims, we fall short. As non-Muslims, people fall short. And when we have this, minorities, especially living in societies that are being affected by this, what do you call it, politics of fear or racism or discrimination, minorities often find themselves treated differently than the majority. And it's almost like there's an unofficial license for them to do so. So what we've seen, not only as individuals living amongst our peers and co-workers and having to deal with the conversations about Islam being a radical, extreme, terrorist religion, we know it to be different. All of us here, we live it differently. We understand it. We are just telling them that they don't understand us. But while we're going through that process, discrimination, hate, fear, anxiety exist. And when that happens, people act according to what they think they know. And I want to share with you some of the things that you, as the Muslim community, should be aware of. In the aftermath of 9/11 and all these new regulations, the government is taking a position that is very unique in our legal history. And they are taking a position of what's called preemptive prosecution. If you don't know what that means, they want to catch people before they commit a crime. So we have laws against, we have crimes, right? So they want to set the bar ahead of the crime. So there isn't any, quote, terrorism. To do that, they have to catch people before anything ever happens. That's called preemptive prosecution. I'm going to talk to you a minute about how that works and why it's so important for us as a community to deal with it. But you should be aware that one of the laws that can affect everybody in here was passed after 9/11 called the Patriot Act. How many of you are familiar with that? How many of you read it? Who read it? You read the Patriot Act? That's more than all the congressmen, senators. Everybody who passed it never read it. But that's good. How did it? In the Patriot Act, there are new laws or legislation that was passed to help the United States prosecute the war on terror. Okay? I'm against terrorism. We're all against terrorism. Everybody here is against terrorism. So if there's something that keeps us safe from terrorism, I'm for it, 100%. One of the ways the government is addressing this issue is through a piece of legislation called the Material Support Statute. How many of you know what that means? I say Material Support Statute. I'll use it in a sentence and then it should become clear. It's against the law for any U.S. citizen or any resident who lives in the United States to provide material support to a designated terrorist or a terrorist organization. Okay, so that's what material support. So if I ask you to tell me what examples come to your mind as forms of material support, what does that mean? I can't provide material support. What is material support? Anybody?
Financial.
Financial for sure. What else?
Advisory.
Huh?
Housing, giving somebody housing.
Housing, yeah. What else? The definition says you can't provide any financial support. You can't provide any weapons, right? Guns, ammo. You can't provide any, you can't join. You yourself are material. You can't provide any information, any logistics, anything that can be considered a benefit to a terrorist or a terrorist organization. So if what you do can be twisted into somehow benefiting some terrorist or terrorist organization, that would fit the definition of material support. You follow? So I'm going to ask you a question. If Khalil Meek leaves Epic tonight, I get on a plane, I buy a ticket to Somalia. Right? The reason I go to Somalia is I want to help people. I know there's a lot of starving, I know there's people suffering. I just want to do something good. I get into Somalia. Tomorrow, I find a building. I put up a sign that says, if you're hungry, come eat. So I'm going to feed people. And tomorrow, I feed over 200 people. Alhamdulillah. After I feed them, finished, somebody comes up to me and says, Khalil, I think you should know that 3 people who came today and ate your food, they're associated with a group called Al-Shabaab. Well, Al-Shabaab is designated, which means I would have fed 3 terrorists. Is that material support?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
By definition.
Not in actuality, but in the eyes of hatred.
By intention.
Okay. Still in Somalia. Let's say I need, well now it's a little different, haircut or shave. I need to shave my head, right? It's time to get a haircut. I don't speak the language, so I don't even know how to ask somebody. But I look around and I see a barber pole. You know, there's a business with that wet and right pole spinning, so that's got to be a barber shop. I just walk up and point to my head. He points to the chair. So I sit down, he shaves my head, he holds up 10 fingers, so I give him $10. Salam alaikum. I got a haircut. After my haircut, I pick up the newspaper. I see a picture of my barber in the paper. So I read the article. It says my barber is associated with Al-Shabaab. I gave him $10. Is that material support?
Yes.
Huh?
Passive material support.
Yeah.
Passive.
Passive, yeah.
Involuntary.
Okay. Last question. Still in Somalia. I asked somebody, I say, look, you know what? I would like to speak to somebody who's in charge of Al-Shabaab. Can you take it? They said, sure, brother, come with me. So I go to someone and they say, this is the leader, speak to him. So I go, Salam alaikum, my name is Khalil. And I want to tell you that I think what you do sometimes is causing more harm than good. In fact, we would all agree that all conflict eventually will end. Sooner or later it's going to be over. The sooner the better, right? Do we agree? The sooner it's over the better? So I want you to know, here's the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is what the Prophet said about moderation. Here's the words of Jesus, peace be upon him. Here's the words of Gandhi or Jimmy Carter, an ex-president. Here's the best roadmap to peace ever. Please follow this. Assalamu alaikum. I gave advice to a terrorist. Is that material support?
Yes.
I told him to quit doing what he's doing.
Yeah.
I believe in one legal precedent it happened.
The reason I'm asking you this, I want you to really take this to heart. Because if you leave here understanding what I'm saying, it can protect you and your family, because I'm going to tie it into your living room in just a second. All of these questions that I'm asking you, right? I mean, people are like, yeah, but, well, you're scratching your head, okay? And the reason for that is the definition of material support is vague. It's comprehensive. It means anything. And yet, if you have to function in conflict zones, if you have to function in society, Muslim charities, non-Muslim charities, legal experts all understand what the government's trying to do. They agree with the government. We want to be safe. We do not want to enhance terrorism. I agree with that. But in the process, we have to function. We have to help people. We have to do things. And it can't be just in a nice, comfortable area like Plano. Sometimes there's conflict. How do we do that? So there were people who were asking the government for guidance. Our lawyer says that we have to pay attention to this. How do we not get in trouble? That's a good question. And they would ask the government, what if this happens? Are you going to prosecute us? What if I feed somebody and I don't know who they are and you tell me they're a terrorist? So the government said, well, we're not in the business to give advice. We don't give advice. Read the statute. Ask your lawyer. It was going nowhere. So they sued the government. There was a lawsuit initiated, and it was led by David Cole, a constitutional scholar at Georgetown University. He said, we can't, these charities, these people said, we can't live in this uncertainty. So they sued the government. They wanted to know exactly where the lines are. And the case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court heard the case and made a ruling. And the Supreme Court said that they're not going to be able to solve this problem by fixing the definition of material support. The only solution is to allow the Department of Justice to use its discretion. If the Department of Justice thinks what it sees fits the definition of material support, they're allowed to indict. They can go ahead and charge you with a crime. Does not mean you're guilty, but they can take you to court. Then they can argue to a jury why they think what you did is material support. And if the jury agrees, they can convict. Right? So it's a process. My question to you is this. Do you think giving the Department of Justice that much discretion, they may use that discretion in a political fashion?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you think they may use their discretion to persecute someone while they prosecute them?
Yes.
Do you think they could be creative in their ability to take a set of facts and twist it into a benefit and prosecute someone?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And not only can they have. So what we're seeing is them taking a definition and saying if your kid gets on the internet, right, and he's just surfing, he's in his living room, in his pajamas, he's doing nothing and going nowhere. But he visits certain sites, or he comments about certain things, or he has an opinion about something. And that opinion leads him to vocalize it, or people have just read statements and translated them. This is not my statement. I don't even believe it. But I want you to see how stupid they are. They can twist those things into promoting, advocating for, or helping a terrorist organization. The government is spending millions, if not billions of dollars to keep us safe by sending people to our communities. Right? They hire informants. There's over 20,000, I think at least 20,000 informants. No, it's more than that. Yeah, it's 60,000. 60,000 informants. Now, I'm for being safe, right? So they send people to the communities to make sure that if they hear radicalism, anything that's radical, that they will hear about it soon enough so nothing happens. So they're keeping us safe. If you do the math, that's 2,000 masjids in the U.S., 60,000 agents, that's 30 per masjid. So salam alaikum, whoever's here today. We're glad you're here, right? We want you to keep us safe. But what we're finding is in this environment, politics of fear, anger, anxiety, misunderstanding, that when things aren't happening, they become the radical. The government, the agent, will actually start acting stupid. And if somebody agrees with them and starts to befriend them and they start hanging out together and they talk enough nonsense, eventually the government can arrest them and then prosecute them. So they create their own scenario. It's their ideas, everything is them. But somebody's just gullible or weak or likes friendship, or they're upset one day and things happen. All of this is happening all over the United States. Okay? You need to be aware of it. So protect yourself. Be smart. If you know something's wrong, you deal with it, right? Don't just ignore it. Don't let your kids be stupid. Well, they're kids. They'll get out of it. They're not going to cause any harm. They're just playing cowboys and Indians. Cowboys and Indians now is a serious problem. Right? When I grew up with a cap gun and running around shooting bow and arrows at my friends, we had a blast. We'd all be in jail today doing that. I'm serious. It's a different world that we live in. So, as Muslims, one, we don't have to wait for somebody to tell us to do something. If we're commanded by Allah, establish justice, right? Do the right thing all the time. If you know something's wrong, fix it. Do whatever you can. But on the other hand, living in a society that's the most regulated ever, increasing every day, and you are the target of that regulation, puts you in a vulnerable position. Right? Realize that we all have equal rights, we have equal opportunity, we can all be Americans. But you are a different American in the eyes of the system and everybody else, whether you like it or not. And being that, you need to take it up a notch, right? You got to be a little better than everybody else. As Muslims and as people who have to deal in this society, we should not just ignore what we know is going on, but we should form our own educational process like this so that our kids know what's going on, you know what's going on, we all know what's going on. And then we, like any other minority, should build institutions who can speak on our behalf to the majority and get our point across and our position across and all of the things that, and our protection, united we stand in the issues. Because what the government has taken a position on is filtering in every aspect of our lives. The Muslim Legal Fund deals in cases of immigration, civil, and criminal. And we see a theme in there. And the theme is, if you do something wrong, they want to catch you and stop you. So I'm 100% for that. Let that keep going. But what's happening is they also have a position of if you fit a profile that they're not excited about, they can make your life miserable in immigration, civil or criminal. When this happens, the good news is no matter what they want to do, we're a nation of laws. And they're bound by those laws. So their opinions, their emotions, and their attitude can be dealt with in a courtroom if we choose to do so. And I'll give you an example. I'm probably taking longer than I should, I'm sorry.
Have that kind of defense for our community. Time and time again, MLFA has been there for our community in the courtroom. What CAIR does, and often that's something that's a little bit of a confusing aspect in our community, is that while MLFA defends you in the courtroom, we're out in the community. So we're a grassroots level organization that focuses heavily on advocacy in public, in the media, and encouraging the community to empower themselves and become civically engaged. These are the primary focuses that CAIR deals with. We've seen a lot of cases, a lot of it is very similar to what Brother Khalid stated, a lot of the things that we've seen being perpetrated against the Muslim community, whether it's law enforcement as he went into, or whether it's on behalf of, for example, employers, schools, organizations, if you're a patron of a business and you get discriminated against. We take cases to help the Muslim community stand up for their civil rights and advocate on their behalf. For example, I'll give you a few of the cases, and then I'm going to go into what your rights are, especially in terms of law enforcement. I'll go into that in more detail. But some of the cases that we do here in the community, for example, we've had a number of cases where women who wear hijab are discriminated against in public. It may not be something that needs to be taken to a legal issue where they need to obtain an attorney. Sometimes it is. But a lot of times it needs an advocate, somebody to go on their behalf and try to rectify the situation. For example, a young girl, she was prohibited from taking her exams unless she took off her hijab. It sounds ridiculous to the rest of us, but it happens. People who are not allowed to pray in their places of work. People who were fired because of their Muslim identity or because of wanting to pray or observe their religious practices. All of these things are things that these are all things that are affecting the Muslim community and things that we have to stand up against. Another big aspect that we focus on is media engagement. Working with the media to correct misinformation that's being spread, but also to get good stories out there and to promote, like what Brother Khalid said, build institutions that speak on behalf of the community and get the message out there of what we want to say. Whether it's through op-eds, we like to encourage our Muslim community to write op-eds to newspapers, to online magazines, to make statements to the press if they're competent. We also do press releases and engagements with the media so that we have an opportunity to, like I said, correct misinformation and get the story out there accurately. How's that? Is that better? Hello, hello? Okay. And the final thing that's really important, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The final thing that's really important, it's not the only final thing that we do, but it is very much an integral part of empowering the Muslim community. And that is to get civically engaged. What does get civically engaged mean? Who can tell me? Come on. What does it mean to get civically engaged?
Actively involved on the government politics, go to your city council meetings.
Get involved in politics, whether it's locally. Actually, locally is much more important than federally, because the local elected officials are the ones that have the most impact on our lives. So when you're voting for mayor and getting registered to vote, we're doing big voter registration drives, and if y'all don't know, the last day that you can register to vote is October 4th. So if you're a citizen and you are not registered to vote, please see me after this event so we can get you registered to vote. A lot of people say, why do we need to register to vote? They're all corrupt anyway, blah, blah, blah. Well, if we don't change it, nobody else is going to change it. We have to develop that mentality. And when we have power within our government, within our systems, within our communities, when we have voting power, we can help improve our communities in very concrete ways. So that's critical that we do that. So empowering the Muslim community to get civically engaged. In January, we'll be taking a trip down to Austin every 2 years. We do Muslim Day at the Capitol, Texas Muslim Day at the Capitol. We'll be taking people who are interested, youth, adults. I see some girls slapping, oh, we're going again. Getting excited. We go down, we engage with our elected officials, and we tell them exactly what's on our mind, and we give you training on how to do that. That's really important. We also represent you in Washington and help work on policy and advocacy work as well. Those are the primary things that we focus on. We also do interfaith work. Our national office has a number of researchers and attorneys who do a lot of legal work. And one of the things I'll mention a little bit later on is our recent legislating fear report that was released last year that focuses on Islamophobia, what is the spread of Islamophobia, who are the players, how are they affecting our lives, and so on. I'll talk about that very briefly a little bit later on. What I'm primarily here to talk to you about tonight are your rights as citizens. That's not something we often talk about, and that's not something we often know, what to do in certain situations. Is that the regular event or somebody's phone? Oh, okay. I was like, oh, I'll be quiet. Okay, alhamdulillah. Something that we see over and over and over is when law enforcement comes to visit you. A lot of people do not know how to handle themselves in certain situations. Even when you get stopped for a traffic violation, for example, or expected traffic violation, people don't know what are their rights and what they can do in certain situations. When law enforcement comes and visits their home, the Muslim community, and I'll quote our previous executive director, Brother Mustafa Carroll, law enforcement, and particularly the FBI, and let me make a disclaimer, we need the FBI. We need our law enforcement to be strong and to be vigilant and to protect us. That's critical. That goes without saying. However, the focus that they've placed on the Muslim community, we believe the amount and the heaviness of it is completely unwarranted, because the lack of crime that comes from our community does not indicate that we have issues of extremism, issues of violence, and issues of criminal activity that are plaguing our community to the point where they put such a heavy focus. And I'll give you some really interesting conversation that I had with an FBI agent and somebody who's very familiar with our community. I said to him, I said, look, I don't understand, and this was when I was new in my position. I wanted to get, you know, some face-to-face conversation about you know, what's going on and what we're facing, what we're seeing. And I said, why is the FBI focusing so heavily on the Muslim community? Why are they getting so many informants? Why do I get all of these reports every week? I get 2 or 3 reports of the FBI coming and interrogating them very harshly and very vigorously without having committed any crime whatsoever or asking them to be informants. And like Brother Khalil said, informants are important. They're the vital aspect to law enforcement's work to understand what's going on. But why is there this focus on the Muslim community? Because since 9/11 happened, there's been such a tiny percentage of people who have committed unprovoked crimes, whether it's in the name of religion or whatnot. And I asked him that, and you know what he said to me? He said, frankly, Alia, I don't know. He said, I'm not even going to challenge you on it. I have no idea why we're focusing so much on the Muslim community. They're pillars, they're members of this community, they're excellent citizens, and he touted us over and over. And so when he said that to me, I didn't have any retort to him whatsoever, because I expected him to give me something. But when he agreed with me, that just took me back for a minute, and it further validated what I already knew in my heart, and what we all know is that we're a good community, we're a wonderful community, and we're a strong community. And we're good Americans who represent the values that America was founded upon, and we represent all of the good ideals that our other neighbors do. And that is something that we have to hold on to. So when I talk about these rights, when I talk about what your rights are and how you're allowed to interact, I want you to take that away with you. And how you take that away is we've got these handy little Know Your Rights guides that you can keep in your wallet, and they're kind of water resistant. If you like drown it in a pool, it's probably going to fall apart. But it's got a little slick. So you can keep it with you, and it's got what you do in a situation, okay? So you can say to the cop, hang on 1 second. No, I'm just kidding. Familiarize yourself before you get in a situation, okay? But take these with you. When I'm talking about these rights, I want you to know that you need to internalize these. One of the things that we see, especially in our non-indigenous American immigrant community, we see that the understanding of our rights is not internalized. Born Americans internalize it a lot quicker and a lot deeper. I don't have a problem. I'm not scared to go and say what I want to say because I know I have freedom of speech and this and that and the other thing. Now, I've seen some hairy things happen, but I know what my rights are, and I'm going to stand up for myself. If we can all internalize those rights and we can handle certain situations with confidence, it's going to make us much stronger as a community and as individuals and for your family. So let me jump right into this. And I first want to start by saying all Americans have the constitutional right to due process and to be politically active. The right to due process means that you have the right to not only have your rights observed, but also have rights in order, for example, you are innocent until proven guilty, for example. And there are certain rules that that go along with when you get detained by law enforcement. They have to Mirandize you, they have to do certain things in order for their apprehension of you, if it comes to that, to be legal and to be justified. You have the right for that process to happen, and nobody can take that away from you. So don't be fearful of engaging with law enforcement as long as you stay respectful and as long as you know that your rights can be enforced by the law. That is very important for you to remember. So if you're visited by federal law enforcement agents, you are to remember that you have the right, the legal right, to have a lawyer represent you. Now, something I want to ask you. If you're not a citizen, is that true? Do you have the right to an attorney? Yes. If you are not a citizen of the United States, you still have the right to an attorney. Even if you've been detained, even if you've been arrested, an attorney is best able to protect your rights. You, beyond giving them your identification, you are not obligated to say anything, because anything, and part of the Miranda rights is anything that you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. So once you give them your identification, and a government-issued identification, and you provide that to them, you're not obligated to do anything. If they do not arrest you, you ask the officer if you're free to go, and then you can choose to walk away or to stay, for example. You should never lie or provide false information to any law enforcement agency. No matter what you think, if the officer's wrong, you think that he's unjustly arrested you, detained you, whatever, you do not lie under any circumstances. You should always be providing factual information if you are speaking to them. You should have an attorney present though. And if you need an attorney and it's something that, for example, a discrimination case, you can contact CAIR. If it's something that's of a heavier nature, you definitely should contact MLF, and we can help provide you those things that you need in order to get protected. You do not have to permit any law enforcement officer to enter your home or office if they do not have a warrant. There's only a few, what's the word I'm looking for, exceptions to that rule. For example, there's a rule that, and no Muslim in this room better have this happening at their house, is if the officer smells marijuana, he's allowed to come in without a search warrant, if they have probable cause, for example. But no Muslim is going to do that, right? So it's not going to happen. But if they do not have a search warrant, and you ask them, do you have a search warrant? They say no. But you also don't want to put yourself in a dangerous situation. We've seen in the news that there are cases, legitimate cases of police brutality and abuse of their power. So if there's a situation, you find yourself in a dangerous situation with law enforcement, even though you're not lying, even though you're maintaining your innocence, even though you're asking for your rights, if they abuse your rights, it's not for you to try and take on a law enforcement officer. It's for you to document the situation if you can, and then once the situation is over, then that would be something to bring up with an attorney. So you always want to enforce your rights, but not to your own peril, okay? Not to where you're fighting with a police officer. It's my rights, and you beat the police up. No, like, don't do that. But we have had people who've called us, and that's been the situation. They take violent retaliation against the cop because the cop abused their rights. Do not do that. Remember to ask any investigator who visits you for a business card. We have seen this time and time again in the community. Now, it's standard protocol for the FBI agents, without you even asking, to give your business card. What we've seen is that a lot of the other government agencies, DHS, and especially DHS and ICE, are not that vigilant on providing the business cards. They do have to identify themselves, but if you make sure you can ask for that card, then when you contact an attorney or contact MLFA or CAIR, you have that individual's information. How does that help us? When we see the same FBI agent giving business cards across the community, we're like, hell, maybe I should call this guy and see what's going on, you know. So when we get that same individual's business card over and over, we can kind of see what's happening and where it's happening. But it also helps us to document, and if something needs to happen, or if it becomes a prosecution issue, a litigation issue, and we turn it over to MLFA, for example, the more information you have, the better. So if you're stopped by police on the street, the police must have a specific reason to approach you and question you. If you're approached and questioned, the police can pat you down on the outside of your clothing if they have reason to suspect you are armed and dangerous. You do not have to answer any questions besides what I mentioned, besides identifying yourself and providing a government-issued ID. Okay? So keep that in mind. After the interaction, you'll be either free to leave, as I mentioned before, or they'll place you under arrest. You ask, am I free to leave? And then if they say yes, yes. If they say you're not am I being placed under arrest, then you can also consider leaving, because they cannot detain you indefinitely unless they put you in confinement. Again, stressing the need for obtaining a lawyer and not saying anything until that point. There have been situations where Muslims will say, but I have nothing to hide. We hear this, and I'm sure Brother Khalid can attest to it a lot. Over and over, people say, I have nothing to hide. And the FBI agent knocks on their door and they're like, come in for chai and cookies. You know, and they sit down and they tell them their life story, and it ends up being probably more annoying for the FBI agent, to be honest. But if something happens, and these are legitimate cases, if something happens where the law enforcement officer sees a suspect book on your table, or sees something within your house that they've decided is worth investigation, for example. That they've either come back, they use it against you, and sometimes cases are built upon those. They also, a lot of times, when they're trying to gain informants, and you do not have to be an informant if they come and talk to you. First of all, you don't have to talk to them in the first place. But second of all, you are not required to be an informant because they ask you. But be very careful, because they oftentimes will come after people that have criminal issues, and they'll come and ask people who have immigration issues. And I've witnessed with my own eyes people who have been adversely affected because they didn't have they had legal status, but they didn't have a green card or a citizenship. And their lives were turned upside down because they wanted an attorney and they would not be an informant. So you have to be very vigilant and very careful, and know that there are organizations like ours that can protect you, that can help you. If you are stopped in your car, always keep your hands where they can be seen. You never know what prejudices that officer is carrying within them. They're human beings just like the rest of us. We all carry prejudices, and they carry prejudices. And you never know what's going to happen. You don't want to be paranoid or fearful to the point that you're incapacitated, but you want to be observant. You want to be vigilant. So you want to understand that you're going to do everything possible to make sure that you give that officer no reason to abuse your rights or to cause any problems that might harm you. So keeping your hands on the wheel where the officer can see them, making sure you're not reaching for something, or, you know, I throw my purse like everywhere. When I get in the car, I'm an activist, so I have stuff all over my car and books and whatever. So the officer comes and I'm like, you know, digging in my car to try and find my license and my insurance card. That's not a good sign. You should have it ready to go and have your hands on the wheel. And when the officer comes to you, be respectful. Provide him your identification. Provide him with your insurance card. Officer, why have you stopped me today? And so on and so forth, right?
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Yes, please.
It's 9 o'clock right now, and actually Salat is about to start. So we'll go ahead and break for Salat right now. And but I do request everyone, please do come back. I'm sure a lot of you do have questions, and please do not hold back and say, you know what, I have to go home. Your question can actually help.
Fashion. They, in immigration, may take a position that, you know, even though they're harmless, they're effective, so we don't want them here. So they can, through the immigration process, try to deny them status, try to make it miserable, try to deport them, try to say, we just don't like you. But legally, they just can't put that on there. You know, that don't look American enough to me, go home. Or we don't like you. So they have to make up reasons. How do I put this? I want to give you an example of preemptive law enforcement. Pretend with me for a second that I'm an expert. I am not an expert, but pretend that I'm an expert on bank robbers. Right? Let's say I've studied every bank robbery in the US over the last 200 years. I'm the authority. I know how they walk, how they talk, how they think, how they act. I know everything about a bank robber. I'm the expert. Would you like me to share with you the profile of a bank robber?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's say bank robbers, they dress in a certain fashion. Well, first off, most bank robbers are men, not women. Sisters, you're safe. And it's usually men over the age of 30. So the young guys, you're safe. Everybody else, not so much. Now let's say the bank robber, the profile of a bank robber, the way they look, the way they walk, the way they talk. Let's say they dress in a certain fashion. What am I going to pick on? Let's say that the bank robber likes to wear, you know, beige pants, like a lime green shirt, has a white beard, glasses. What's your name? I'm sorry?
Just kidding.
Ahman Ghazi. Ahman, I think you should know. As an expert, you look like a bank robber. That's not a crime. Not at all. Not even a little bit, right? But the way you dress and the way you look, I'm watching. Now, for me to get concerned, right, there would actually have to be banks in Plano. Are there any banks around here? Oh, there are banks in Plano. That's not good. Have you ever been to a bank in Plano? That's not good. Have you opened a checking account? You know, bank robbers sometimes open checking accounts to become familiar with banks before they rob them. I'm worried about you. But you know what? Even though I'm concerned, I'm still not there yet. Because if you rob a bank, what's the most important thing? Yeah, you gotta leave in a hurry, right? You need a getaway car. Now, Sheikh, you don't own a car, do you? Holy cow. That's not good. Folks, you know, as an expert in what we just learned tonight, it's my professional opinion that he's about to rob a bank. How many of you think we should arrest him before that happens? Now we're laughing because you see how stupid that is, right? You can see the fallacy of the argument. But if we take the same example and twist it just a little, pretend like I'm a terrorism expert. I know everything about terrorists. And for the sake of our example, you now look, you dress like a terrorist. Where are you from? Holy shit. Any terrorism going on in Bangladesh? They tried to hang somebody yesterday, didn't they? They wouldn't let them. That's not good. So you look like a terrorist, you're from Bangladesh, a terrorist country. Are you going back to Bangladesh anytime soon? A wedding, a funeral, relatives? As soon as you buy that plane ticket, I'm going to have you arrested. Because I think what you're going to do in Bangladesh is going to be harmful. And I'm going to prosecute you. I'm going to take you to a court. And I'm going to talk to a jury who watches CNN and Fox News and Peter King. And they've heard of anti-Sharia legislation. And I'm the expert wanting to tell them why I think you're a terrorist and you're about to do something wrong. Now how funny is it? It lost its humor in a hurry, didn't it? Now, how many of you have ever had to hire a lawyer? Anybody? How much do lawyers cost? How much? They charge by the hour, right? You know, the average is $250 an hour for 1 hour. How many hours do you think the Sheikh would have to pay if he needed a lawyer? How many?
Hundreds.
Huh?
Hundreds, depends.
How many hours is it going to take to defend him? Well, whoever you hire, they're going to have to spend time, right? It's going to take them anywhere from 500 to 1,000 hours to learn everything about him. Because this kind of case, I need to know everything about you. I need to know where you're from, who you know, who they know, everything the government knows about you, everything the government thinks they know about you, everything they make up about you. So I've got to spend time preparing just to go to court, right? How many of you have, if it's 1,000 hours, have $250,000 to hire a lawyer? See me after the lecture. Nobody, so then what happens? Hey, no. Here in America, huh?
They don't take that.
No, here in America, we think your right to confront your accusers is so serious and necessary that if you can't afford a lawyer, we'll give you one. Right? So they'll give you a lawyer. Yeah, but they pick, not you. Now, would you prefer to find a lawyer who you pick, who has a skill set that you're comfortable with, who knows Muslims, who understands your situation and wants to do everything they can to free you, or a public defender who's told to defend you? Huh? Yeah, okay. Well, obviously he wants to pick, and if he can't afford it, how can that happen? I'm going to make a plug now. Muslim Legal Fund, that's what we do. We hire the best lawyers to help in this situation. We deal in cases where there's no violence, no victims, no property damage, nothing's happened. Preemptive or, in fact, a charitable act has taken place that's been twisted into criminal conduct. We've dealt with lots of these cases. So anyway, that's what we do. That's why we do it. That's why I think it's important. And thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. I see most everybody was here beforehand. Yes, yes. Okay, so I'm going to do a little quiz, see if we can catch back up, especially for those who are joining us new. Do you or do you not have the right to an attorney if you are detained? Is that your legal right? Whether you're a citizen or not, correct? Yes. Does an officer have the right to enter your home without a search warrant? No. Is it okay to lie to a law enforcement officer? No. What should you do if an investigator or officer visits you? Ask for a business card, correct. If you are stopped by the police on the street, this is where we're picking up with. We talked about this, but I'm going to go back through this and get us caught up. The police must have a specific reason to approach you and to question you. If you're approached and questioned, the police can pat you down above your clothing if they have a fear of you being possibly dangerous or containing weapons or trying to commit violence, if they have a reasonable suspicion. You do not have to answer any questions besides identifying yourself and to show who you are with a government-issued ID. After the interaction, you'll either be free to leave or you'll be detained. If you are free to leave, then you can go on your way. Sometimes they won't. Oh, sorry. I was like, the microphone's moving. Okay, this is bad. Ask the officer clearly if you are free to leave or if you're under arrest, and if you're free to leave, you can consider just walking away. In your car, what should we do with our hands when we're in our car and we're stopped by a law enforcement officer?
Turn on the steering wheel.
Yes, correct. He beat you to it, the guy behind you. But yes, both of you are correct. Keep your hands on the steering wheel where they can be seen, so there's no reason for the officer to suspect any problems or any that you might be committing any wrongdoing. You want to make sure they're as comfortable as possible approaching you. And that's something I want to mention on behalf of the law enforcement officers. I work with the Fort Worth Police Department very intimately, and we talk, I sit on the Chiefs Advisory Council, and we talk a lot about the Muslim community, but also about law enforcement in general, what some of their fears are. One of the biggest fears that law enforcement officers have are traffic cops who stop people on the street. Because it's a cold stop, they have no idea what they're going to come across when they go up to that car. One of the biggest threats that face law enforcement today are sovereign citizens. Does anybody know what sovereign citizens are? Yeah. Yes, no?
Carry arms.
I'm sorry?
Carry arms.
Some of them do carry arms, and some of them, a small percentage, have been known to be violent towards law enforcement officers. They don't recognize government, they don't recognize law enforcement, they don't pay taxes. They believe that they're sovereign citizens who don't have to abide by law enforcement. And so when law enforcement officers, since that has been a problem a lot of times, they get more and more nervous when they approach vehicles. So while we do want to make sure we observe the laws, also keep in mind the officer's concern for his safety as well. So you want to have your hands on the wheel. Don't give the officer a reason to think that you might be doing something wrong, or will cause him a problem. It makes him even more edgy. And we do hold them to a higher standard of protecting us, and certainly police brutality is an issue, but we also want to make sure there's a lot of good police officers out there, and we want to do our part as good citizens. You do not have to consent to a search, but police may have the legal grounds to search your car anyway. Clearly say to them that you do not consent to the search. And remember what we said before we broke, that even though you say, I do not consent to a search, you do not want to put yourself in a dangerous situation by getting into an altercation with an officer. Even if they go and abuse your rights, and you believe that they've abused your rights, you don't try to take on a law enforcement officer to assert your rights. You let that happen in court later or with an attorney outside of court. Okay, if you are arrested or taken to a police station, remember, you do not have to talk to any police officer. Once you've provided your identification, your government issued ID and your name, you do not have to talk to anybody. So if you're arrested and taken to a police station, remember that you don't have to speak to anyone if they ask you questions. Clearly ask for an attorney, and you get the one phone call until they are provided. If you cannot afford an attorney, the government will provide you one. But if you believe that you have been detained unlawfully or specifically for discrimination issues relating to you being a Muslim or your ethnic identity, if you fear that there's something like that involved, please feel comfortable to contact CAIR. We have our number posted on our website. Unfortunately, the number in the Know Your Rights booklet is incorrect, so keep that in mind. We have like 1 bazillion of them, so we have to get rid of those before they get reprinted. But our number is available everywhere. What? I called it and it was out of service. Yeah, but I don't know, maybe that was an off day. Maybe it's on his cell phones. You get to take call on his cell phone. No, I'm just kidding. Please feel free to ask me for our phone number. We have brochures here that you can have that as well. Where are we? If you are mistreated, do not resist arrest or fight with any police officers, as I previously mentioned. Write down the officer's name, get as much info as possible, and when you have the opportunity, document the situation in your own words. Make sure that you take as much information as possible so that if it comes to a situation where legal action has to be taken, that you've got your facts straight before they get out of your head. Try to find witnesses and write down their contact information, get a badge number of the police officer, file a CAIR complaint as soon as possible before any time passes. Now, your rights if you're contacted by DHS, which that covers FBI, that covers ICE, that covers USCIS, that covers CBP. We get a lot of cases from Muslims who go through Customs and Border Control, and they get randomly selected, or they get. Has anybody ever had a quad S on their 4 S's on their boarding pass? That means you're special, 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 special. You get 4 S's, just FYI, you're about to get searched. It's not a good thing, and there is a lot of work being done, especially by CAIR, in order to work with CBP to try and get things like the selectee list, which is the 4 S's, the no-fly list. There's no due process with that, which is a constitutional right. So that is heavily being worked upon in our policy work to try and get that rectified. So we've had a situation, we've had multiple situations, but I'm just going to explain one situation where a gentleman, he went through CBP in Canada, and when he was coming home to the U.S. But U.S. Customs and Border Control is there in Canada at the border. So when he was going to get on a plane to come back home, he was randomly selected, and the officer was the Customs and Border Control agent was very rude, and he was asking him questions that were inappropriate, concerning which religion are you, things like that. They're not allowed to do that, because that indicates that they're profiling you for a religion or your ethnic identity. When they went through Customs and Border Control and he got selected, they took him to interrogation. It took 4 hours, et cetera, et cetera. So he was like, okay, maybe it was randomly selected. He came back the next day, and they randomly selected him. And he said, I'm sorry, I'm an engineer. I deal with numbers all day long. There's no such thing as 2 days in a row I've been randomly selected. It's mathematically impossible. And so he told them that he was quickly processed through, so it only took a matter of minutes. And when he boarded his plane, he immediately called me. We filed what's called a DHS trip report, and it gives you a redress number so that you're removed from whatever list you are on. The difficulty with that is that a lot of times it takes a very long time to get some people removed, or they never get a response whatsoever, and they continue to have problems. We have cases they can't even travel because it's just a continual vicious cycle that they have to go through. So please contact CAIR so we can get an advocate on your behalf and try to get you some help. So the Department of Homeland Security, like I said, includes the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Bureau of Customs and Border Control, and the Bureau of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. If you're not a U.S. citizen and you're contacted by a DHS official, remember, you have the right to an attorney. So whether it's a police officer or a DHS official, you have the right to an attorney. It's a good idea to carry the contact information of an immigration attorney or CAIR, for example, so that if you get into a situation, I had somebody literally call me from Palestine because they wouldn't let them out of the country. And their children are American citizens, and they themselves were green card holders. But they weren't allowed to leave when the war in Gaza happened. They were told they would not be allowed to leave because they're not citizens. First they didn't have an evacuation procedure, they were stuck. Then once they did get the evacuation procedure in place, they were telling the family that they weren't going to be able to let them go. They contacted me, and that was a whole shenanigan of issues, and talking to the State Department and talking to the consulate, and days and very odd hours because of the time difference of trying to get our citizens out of a foreign country, and our residents of this country, their tax-paying residents. And so we contacted Congress people and everything. So do not hesitate to call us. The office phone goes to my cell phone. So if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's going to answer my cell phone. So if there's a situation, we're there for you. If you are not a U.S. citizen, you're contacted by a DHS official, we said you have the right to an attorney. Never sign anything without reading it, understanding it, and knowing the consequences of signing it. And frankly, what would be my advice in this situation? Make sure there's an attorney who looks at it before you sign it, if you have that opportunity. You have that right, and you should enforce it. Federal law requires you to carry your registration documents with you at all times if you're not a citizen. Once your immigration status has been shown to an officer, you do not have to answer any questions. I know you're seeing a pattern, but our community is very open and very, sometimes it's out of fear, sometimes it's just out of congeniality. They want to be happy, they want to cooperate with law enforcement. You have to know your rights and you have to enforce them. So please, always know that you don't have to speak to anybody beyond giving that initial information. You also should not be asked improper questions. No DHS officer may ask you anything about your religious or political beliefs, groups that you belong to or contribute to, things that you have done or said in the past, or where you have traveled. A lot of people will get questions. This happened a lot more a few years ago, but there's been a lot of work that's done to try and correct that within, especially with the Customs and Border Control, of asking people, so where are you going? So what were you there for? So I understand you're part of this group. They have research on you, by the way. So they'll sit there and they'll bring up stuff, like, how did you get that information? Oh, off your Facebook page, So these are trained government agents who deal in intel, so they collect information on people, especially who are on things like the no-fly list and whatnot. So they'll ask you things like, oh, are you Sunni or are you a Shia? Are you a Salafi? That was a big one. Are you a Salafi? Oh, really? And they'll ask you questions based on that. Oh, do you support XYZ group? Do you support XYZ group? And whatever the flavor, terrorist organization of the day is, they'll, so try to get information on you, see how you react to certain questions and situations. That is not okay for them to ask, and especially you should not be answering those. So it's very important that you know that you have the right to remain silent. If I could sum anything up about your rights, you have the right to remain silent and you have the right to an attorney. If you remember those two things, and if you haven't gotten the little Know Your Rights guide, please pick one of those up. They're very handy. And I just want to say something, because originally this talk was billed as Say No to Hate. And we've talked a lot about rights, and we've talked a lot about what our organizations do, and we've talked a lot about the religious aspect of it. But if you have a few moments, I'd like to just touch base briefly on the issue of what we're facing with regards to ISIS and what we're seeing in the media. That's something we deal with heavily. Monday we're having a press conference, and we're going to have our religious leaders to go on record to make a statement to the press, to give information to the North Texas community about where we stand on this issue. I would be speaking to the choir. We know where we stand on this issue. It's barbarism, right? It's terrible and it's horrific violence. what we're seeing now with regards to the situation is every time that happens, and by the way, the majority of people being killed, I'm sure most of you know this, are Muslims. So people are making a big hairy deal about Christians being killed. Muslims are the vast majority of people being killed. That's something that's important to remember, that these terrorist groups are not promoting Islamic ideology. They're not promoting anything that resembles anything of what we practice. And when we're speaking, and this is the part that I want to emphasize, when we are speaking to our family, to our friends, to our coworkers, to, if you're doing an op-ed in the media, that's unequivocal. But we also don't have to apologize. We are not guilty of ISIS. We are not guilty of the crimes that are being committed by these horrific individuals. We are free from that, and Islam is free from that. So that's something for us to be confident about, to not be wishy-washy about. It needs to be very direct and very clear when you're interacting with people on the street. I know that our office, and I would grant the MLFA's office is the same, but the increase in the level of hate calls, I get phone calls with people who want to talk to me 1 to 2 hours. I try to engage them up to a point because some people are genuinely scared. They're genuinely scared for their lives, and because of a lot of right-wing media and a lot of hate sites that they go on, they think that ISIS is going to come in secretively and commit secret jihad against all of the non-Muslims, and they're going to take over America and cut off everybody's heads. Right? That's literally what people are saying. And the amount of vitriol and the amount of hatred. CAIR is basically like a, what are those things? You know those lights that kill flies, right? They come and attract. Like we take it for you, right? We're that little light, and the flies, those little people who come and they want to attack the Muslim community, they come and they just dump it all on CAIR, right? We're your punching bag for the community. Alhamdulillah that we have a punching bag for the community. But the increase in the amount of hatred and vitriol that we've seen in this post-ISIS situation or current ISIS situation has been overwhelming, and the amount of hate speech that we're receiving, the amount of threats that we're receiving, and the increase in violent acts that we're seeing across the country. Elected officials are now they're not apologizing for what they're saying, if you notice. Some of the elected officials, especially in Oklahoma, if you pay attention, it's important for us to be vigilant on that. Elected officials are making disparaging statements about Muslimin and equating them all to ISIS, and saying that Christians and non-Muslim Americans should be wary of Muslims. And they equate us hand in hand with that. That cannot pass. We can't allow that. We can't be silent about it. We can't allow people to speak like that about us and to misrepresent Islam like that. So it's our responsibility collectively, in order to not apologize for ISIS, but to stand up and educate people on what Islam is through our actions, through meeting people. Don't be scared to go and say Assalamu alaikum to somebody. I'm going to close with this final comment about how we engage in our community. Our theme this year for CAIR is unity in community. That's really important. It doesn't just mean unity in our Muslim community. It means unity in our North Texas community, in our American community, in our world community. It's very important that we reach out to people and not be afraid to represent ourselves properly. It's not about giving dawah. Dawah is done with our actions. If somebody wants to ask about Islam, let them know about Islam. What it is about neighborhoods and neighbors and building relationships with people. The vast majority of people in this country have never met a Muslim. And of those people, the vast majority of them don't have anything good to say about Islam. And that's our responsibility to correct. The story that I want to close with is I was in a Szechuan restaurant in Fort Worth. I live in Fort Worth. And I was at a Szechuan's restaurant. And this man, I overheard him. He was an elderly gentleman. And he said, I was talking to my friend and I overheard him, and he said, why does she wear that thing on her head? Why can't she dress like the rest of us? I was like, oh Lord, not right here in Szechuan's, please, I don't like scenes. And so I was like, oh God, this guy's gonna come and create a scene right here in this spicy restaurant. And so I wanted to avoid whatever it was gonna say. He was like, when I heard him say, I'm gonna go say something, I'm like, oh my God, it's gonna go down right here in the sunflowers. So I got up and I I hurried over to his table. And he was elderly, so it was taking a little bit of time for him to get out of his chair. And I was over at his table before he even got out of his chair. And I said, can I help you? And I had a smile on my face. And he looked at me and he was like not prepared for that one. And he was like, oh my God. And so he shocked back into his chair. I took a seat. I said, can I sit down? And we're good. So I sat down and I said, what can I help you with? And he said, I just don't understand why you people are doing this. I don't understand why you want to kill us all. I was like, kill you all? What are you talking about? And he said, what I'm seeing on the news. I said, listen, Muslims are just as scared as you are. Muslims are just as fearful as you are because all we want are safe homes and safe environments to raise our families and to live our lives. And he said, but why do you have to dress like that? And I went into it, I explained it. And then you know what happened next? This elderly man, a gentleman, started crying his eyes out in front of me in Szechuan's restaurant. He started crying and pouring his heart out to me of how he didn't know what to do anymore. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know who to be afraid from and who to not be afraid from. And afterwards, we exchanged phone numbers and offered to invite each other for barbecues at each other's houses. That's exactly the kind of people who spit fire on Facebook and Twitter and will call us on the phone because they don't know any better. So it's not about hating them. It's about loving our community as a whole enough that when things like ISIS happen, we don't wait for somebody else to fix our problems. We go out and we fix them, and it's not about bringing them to the fold of Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of that. It is about bringing them closer to humanity. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
We'll go ahead and open the floor for questions. For the sisters, let me just give you this. So if any of you sisters have questions, you can write it down.
The first question I have says, Brother Khalil, what is the correct answer to your hypothetical question of going to Somalia and feeding the hungry or getting a haircut at the local barber shop? The question is, it can be considered material support, and the Department of Justice has the discretion to either bring it to court or not. It doesn't mean it's a crime because it goes to a jury who has to understand the facts and whether you meant to, whether you didn't, how you intended, what you knew, what you didn't know. All of that can come into play. But the lawsuit from the Humanitarian Law Project, led by David Cole, says that this definition of material support is basically any benefit to a terrorist organization. Well, that means anything that can be construed as beneficial, which could be any example you can think of. People are, they use the argument, what if an academic decides to write about a particular organization? If the government wanted to, it doesn't mean they could be found guilty by a jury, but if the government wanted to, they could say, well, somehow you writing about them is publicizing them and helping them, so they could make an argument if they thought they wanted to. They're allowed to do that. Doesn't mean that you're guilty, but they have that much flexibility. So what I was trying to get across in that example is not to just scare you and say anything can be a crime, but what we've seen in our societies is that some people are affected by the events that are surrounding them. And some people we label them as Islamophobes, right? We say that, you know, they are at a position in their mind where my mind is made up. Do not confuse me with any more facts, right? So they've got their conclusion. And it's a very small percentage of the people. It's the majority of the people stay open-minded. They want to hear the facts. This guy had his mind made up, but she talked to him and he started crying. So they're impressionable. But there are some people that are Islamophobic and they're acting upon their conclusions, and it's a small fraction of people, but it could be anybody. It could be your neighbor, it could be your coworker, it could be your boss, it could be a government official, it could be a police officer, it could be anybody. When they have authority and that disposition, they can make your life miserable, right? They can at least initiate misery. Then you have to deal with it. And that's what these organizations are trying to help with, is to say, when that happens, when somebody is mixing emotion and politics with legal, we need to separate it all out and fix that. And that's the moral of the story. That's her question.
So this question says, if an FBI agent comes and wants to talk to you or hand you something to hold and maybe wants your fingerprints, how should you respond, and to what extent should you give answers? What do y'all think I'm going to say? Lawyer. Yeah, don't get a lawyer. Get an attorney. If they want your fingerprints, say no. You want to get an attorney. You want to assert your rights. If you decide to talk to them, you're not going to be giving your fingerprints at any one point. If they want to, I'm not sure, other than the fingerprints, because it was specifically what they mean by if they want to hand you something. But they have protocol that they have to follow also. So they're not going to be asking you to hold a packet of suspicious package or something like that. Now, if you get embroiled in some other kind of scheme to try and thwart terrorism, that is a different problem. But if you are approached by the FBI, you should, in my opinion, decline to speak to them and ask for an attorney. If you do speak to them, make sure you do not lie, and make sure you are cooperative and that you do not cause any problems.
Let me just add to that. In other words, I want to have cooperation with law enforcement, right? That's healthy. I encourage our community that you don't wait for law enforcement to do the right thing. Right? So if you know something's wrong, you take it to them. But I am here to tell you that I agree with my sister 1,000% in the fact that if you are requested to have an interview with law enforcement, right, in the coffee shop, let's talk for a few minutes, let's just get to know it. This isn't about you, just want to ask you some questions, everything's cool, want to be your friend. That you tell the agent, I would love to meet with you, and I just need to schedule an appointment with my attorney, and we'll come. Because I want you to understand, in this country, right, you have the right to remain silent. Let's understand why that's a right. Why is that so important? In our legal system, which we're a nation of laws, so everything matters legally, you are 100% innocent until proven guilty, 100%. If an agent is coming to you to speak about anything, it does not matter what the topic is. When you're speaking to them, it's an official record. If you give 1,000 correct answers, can you be 101% innocent? Can you improve your status? Can it get any better than where it started? It's impossible. The only direction that conversation can go is down or stay the same. There's only one. It either goes against you or it stays right where it was when you started. The reason you need to be aware of that is that anything you say in that conversation can be used against you. And it isn't just a lie. Lying is an obvious stupidity to law enforcement. Never do that. But you can actually be held accountable for lying without making a false statement. It's called by omission. I tell you everything I say is true, but I leave out details. That's lying by omission. Right? You didn't say anything untrue. Who was here tonight? John, Ben, I talked to these 7 people, right? And that was the best of my recollection. But I made a statement there were 6 people I talked to. There were really 12. I didn't lie, I talked to all 6 of them. But by omission, you can lie to a federal agent. The reason that's important is when an agent comes to you, they're on official business. Any false statement can be considered perjury. That's a crime. Because they're there on business, it can also be considered obstruction of justice. So anytime an agent wants to make your life miserable after a conversation, if they can point to one statement of omission, they could make your life miserable. That's why any attorney won't have a conversation with law enforcement without another attorney. That's why Bill Gates, if he wants to talk to somebody about his charity somewhere or whatever's going on here, he will bring 10 attorneys. It's why anybody who talks to law enforcement as an official statement will ask an attorney to be present, because they can say the exact same thing or phrase everything you say to the best of my recollection. Then it's not a false statement, because you can recall something in 1 second that you didn't recall then, and it's a true statement. So the way you answer questions, the way you ask questions, the way you give information can be held against you. Now, I'm not going to say that they come to your shop or they want to talk to you because they have an agenda. But what we found out is they want to talk to you. They like you. They like the imam. They think this imam is a really good guy. And they want the imam to help them keep up with what's going on in the community. And he says, I'll help you any way I can. And in fact, you want me to bring something to the community, I'll bring it to the community. You want the community to tell me what they want, I'll bring it to you, and I'll be an open book back and forth. They say, well, that's not exactly what we had in mind. We want you to just inform us of what's going on. He says, oh, you want me to spy on my community? Well, that's against my religious beliefs. I can't spy. It has to be open. So if you're asking me to spy, I'm not interested. Well, then they say, well, if you're not interested, we like you, we want you, you're at a green card status, you want this. Well, no, we think that you made a false statement. We can charge you with perjury and obstruction of justice. So they get ugly with you. Then, if you don't cooperate, then they can proceed down that path. And I'm not here to say this is a fantasy. This isn't something that I'm just making up. I have dealt with many cases of people just having interviews, conversations, not about them, that have led to legal action. And the reason that they got themselves in that situation is they put on their dawah hat. I've got nothing to hide. I'm a Muslim. I'm a good guy. Come in my house. Let me show you how good we really are, hoping he'll take shahada before he leaves. He's there on business because he's on a fact-finding mission. And during that conversation, some facts were left out or misrepresented, and now we have problems. So the advice is, encourage you to have the conversation. I'd love to meet with you. Call us, call CAIR, we'll make sure. That's enough. That will help you not get into that problem. Not because you're trying to hide anything. And you have the right to do that for a reason. We believe that in this country, we should have the right to remain silent. You can't perjure yourself, so just know you have it and exercise it in the nicest way you know how.
For the brothers and sisters, for those of you who are writing out your questions on the index cards, please write who you want your question to be answered by. So if it's Brother Khalid, do write Brother Khalid. If it's Sister Alia, just do write Sister Alia, because I'm looking at the question, I'm just so confused, like who should I give it to? So please do write.
Can questions only be in written form, or can they be asked publicly from here?
Speeches.
Okay, yeah, I think I agree with that, as long as they're not speeches.
Somebody asked a question about
Yeah, we'll get to that. So please do write on the index card who you want your question to be answered by, Sister Alia.
And just to close on that particular question, something I forgot to mention, Brother Mustafa Carroll, who was our executive director before I took office a few years ago, they were in a meeting with the FBI. It was a regular quarterly meeting. And he said, he asked the same question that I did actually. He said, why do you not focus your questions towards people who are actually committing crimes, like white supremacists and things like that, like people who are engaged in terrorism and different activities? Why are you focusing so much on the Muslim community? And the answer to his question then was because those groups won't talk to us. I want that to sink in for a minute. We focus so heavily because those groups don't talk to us. Those groups don't talk to us. So therefore, they don't even bother with them anymore. But we, like you said, open the door, give them chai, give them cookies, have a nice conversation with them, or friendly and happy and everything like that. So please, let that sink in, kind of the message we're trying to walk away with. This was the next question I received. What kind of steps is CAIR taking with the media defending the image of Muslims in America in regards to ISIS? So one of the things I mentioned was that we are having a press conference on Monday that we will have leader, and Nadeem is going to be there, inshallah. Class, you haven't confirmed with me. Inshallah, he's going to be there. I'm going to hold him accountable for it. Everybody witnesses, okay? Yes, he'll be there? Inshallah. So we will have religious leaders who will come and give public statements to that effect. What happens when we have a press conference? What we hope to have happen is that we send out a press release and we send it out. We developed our media contacts. We have pretty good media contacts, personal relationships with journalists and things like that are interested in helping tell the story of Muslimin in this community. What we hope to have happen is that 5, 6, 10 news cameras, radio journalists, print media, Dallas Morning News, Star Telegram, et cetera, et cetera. We hope to have them show up. We hope they will be interested enough to hear what we have to say on this topic, and that they will disseminate this information to the broader community, okay? So that it goes on the 10 o'clock news. It goes on Dallas Morning News' website. It goes into this magazine and that magazine. Then what could happen after that is that syndicated magazines and so on and so forth can tell this. We've done that nationally. For ISIS in particular, multiple press releases, statements, public press conferences that have happened, videos that have been done. I even condemned ISIS in Spanish. I could pronounce Spanish very well, so I did it off a teleprompter, and I read it and made a statement so that our Spanish language community, we're in Texas, so having those opportunities, seeking out media and developing those relationships so that they want to come to us, they trust us. For example, Univision and Channel 8, we have an established great relationship. I've been working with them on a number of issues and having those opportunities. The other thing that we need to do, one of our community members, Dr. Nizam Hirwani in Tarrant County, he wrote a fantastic op-ed that he sent in to be published, and it got published. And it was his thoughts and his responses with regards to the ISIS situation. That is a normal, everyday citizen. He's not affiliated with CAIR at all. We definitely act as a PR for the Muslim community, a public representative, but it is also in your hands. Maybe you have some really good writing skills. There's a lot of youth in our community who have really good perspectives and writing skills, and they should also be contributing and putting blogs out there and making statements and engaging and putting op-eds out there. So that's another way. And one of the best ways is by sharing positive, informational, not like something you got off the Onion and thought that everybody who knows what I'm talking about knows what I'm talking about. Got it off the Onion, thought it was real, and then you disseminate it. I'm not talking about spreading. This one girl's over here going, oh my gosh. Because it happens all the time. If you're on social media, you know what I'm talking about. People are sharing garbage like over and over. Don't share garbage, share good information that helps educate people on your newsfeed. But if your newsfeed is full of a bunch of Muslimin and nobody from the rest of the community, that message is not going to get out there. It's just going to stay in our little family over here. So those are the most important ways to address it, and how we're addressing it, by relationship building with the media community and by actually taking actions to speak on behalf of the Muslim community. Huh?
Is that all the questions?
That's not all the questions, but I thought maybe there's... there's nothing? Oh, here? Okay. How can we be more civically engaged in our community? And can you give us an example of local organizations to get involved with? One of them has an acronym, a 4-letter acronym. I bet you guess what it is. It's called CAIR, C-A-I-R. CAIR DFW. Please, we would love to get you involved in our community. Like I said, MLFA is defending you in the courtroom, we're defending you in the community. So we're out there, and it takes manpower. It takes manpower to go and register people to vote, for example. For the last month, we've registered over 147 Muslimin to register to vote. How many Muslimin do we have in North Texas? Anywhere from 100 to 200,000 people in our community. 200,000 is kind of stretch, but 140 people, I know a lot more people than that are not registered to vote. So if we have manpower, if we're at all the Masjid, if we're going and doing public, like at an event like this, doing registered to vote events, things like that. We have a lot of events that we hold throughout the year. So we're very active in promoting civic engagement, planning events, going down to Austin, getting involved in the office, for example, and helping to the day-to-day work that has to be done. So that's a great organization. MLFA is an excellent organization to get involved with. They need manpower as well. They need a different kind of manpower. They need more manpower, especially in the office and online and et cetera, and I can let Brother Khalil speak more to that as well.
Yeah, I want to let everybody know that the Muslim Legal Fund has opened a nonprofit law firm here in Dallas, Richardson. We are going to hire the highest caliber of attorneys in the nation to do immigration, civil, and criminal. Our general counsel is a man named Charles Swift. Charles Swift was a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. He was a JAG, a military lawyer. He was counsel for the Northwest Division of the U.S. Navy. They nominated him to be general counsel to the entire U.S. Navy. While he was in the service, he represented a very high-profile detainee, a man called Salim Hamdan, who was the driver of Osama bin Laden. And that case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was Donald Rumsfeld versus Salim Hamdan. Charlie won. The driver went home to Yemen, to his family. Charlie had 20 years in the military. He got out about 6-7 years ago, started private practice criminal defense in Seattle, Washington. We've dealt with him on many cases all over the country. And over the last 6-7 years, he has seen the legal challenges facing the Muslim community in a very personal way. He understands it, immigration, civil, and criminal. And he says these are some of the most serious legal precedents that are being set in these cases for all of Americans that he thinks we should do more. And I said, well, if you believe that, close your practice, come to Dallas, open a law firm, we'll be the sole funders, hire immigration, civil, and criminal. And he said yes. So we're committing $1.5 million a year to this law firm. He's already in Dallas. We have Catherine McDonald as a second attorney. We're now going to, within the next month or so, add immigration, appellate briefs, and junior attorneys and interns. So this will be a full-fledged law firm, fully committed to the Muslim community to deal with the issues that we're talking about tonight.
The final thing I want to mention about getting civically engaged, you know, we've been talking a lot about registering to vote, but also getting involved with organizations that have nothing to do with Islam. Why do I say that? We need a lot of help in the Muslim community. But one of the ways that we need help is to bridge the gap between the Muslim community and the non-Muslim community. We should be involved in our cities without it having some kind of attachment to religion. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations that do great work that are in this community that have nothing to do with Islam, but serving those in need has everything to do with Islam. So that's what I would also encourage you to do. Also, you know, branch out and get out of the Muslim community and do things that benefit our community amongst the people who don't know us. So we need to move beyond that. The final comment was, I love this. I was in Walmart and a guy, and she made a comment. He was old. He was probably like 40. I'm guessing that this is the person who read it. Passed by and yelled out, "America is the greatest country in the world." What should us women wearing hijab do in a situation like that? I'll tell you what I would do. I would have said, absolutely, and told him that. There was a guy who did something similar to me. I was going to the Museum of Natural Science and History, and this guy yelled across the parking lot, "Jesus loves you!" And I said, "I love him too!" So don't be afraid. Most of the time, they don't say anything that we disagree with. So just FYI, I think that's what you should say. It's not really discriminating against you because he tells you. He has some misconceptions and some assumptions he's made about you, but challenge it. But challenge it in a good way. Challenge it in a way that's going to make him think, hopefully. Maybe it'll start a conversation if you're able to. But don't put yourself in a situation with a hostile person either, so be careful about that. I'm done.
All right, Jazakallah khair. In the interest of time, I wanted to make sure that we address all the questions, but it's also past 10 o'clock. If you guys have any more questions, you can write them down and give it to the speakers and interact with them after we officially end this program. And also there was a question regarding providing, is it possible to provide us with a printed copy of your speech in future, inshallah? So this, we're actually recording it, video recording it, and we will make it available on our website and also on our Facebook, so you can go and check it out on our website. Last but not the least, on behalf of EPIC, I'd like to thank our esteemed guest speakers here, Brother Khalil Meek, and Sister Alia Salam. Jazakallah khair. We tried to put together this program on a very short notice, less than a week's time. But alhamdulillah, I think it was fairly successful. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll try to get a bigger audience and do a better job next time. So thank you once again. Jazakumullahu khairan. You're welcome to stay and ask them any questions if you have. Sorry? Yeah, so they have brochures here. If you want to pick up the brochures, please go ahead and feel free to do that. And if you have any other questions, you can ask them, but please be mindful that it's after 10 p.m. And Jazakumullahu khairan.